I'm a vocal critic of council, or have been over the last few years, and as a result of that, I think that there's certainly parts of the council that would like to keep me quiet. I tend to find or have clients that if they're having problems with council, they seem to gravitate to me. Probably partly because I'm willing to step up and fight the fight on their behalf. And I've had clients even just recently ask me, how much work do I do for Tauranga City Council? Because they're having issues with them, they're having battles with them, and I know nothing about it, but they need somebody who can provide them some professional advice and support. And so I sort of step in and we're willing to help them out.
So why is it happening in Tauranga?
I think that what is happening in Tauranga is symptomatic of what's happened in quite a few industries. We've heard about it in the nursing industry where, all they do is basically become administrators but not nursing anymore. We've heard about it in the teaching profession. All they do is, fill in paperwork and, write reports rather than teach. It's gone through the Financial Institute and the legal profession as well, recently in terms of just the bureaucracy. After the Canterbury earthquakes, I saw it actually start creeping in, into the building industry quite significantly, and for some valid reasons. But yeah, certainly, the bureaucracy and so forth that has come in and it seems to be overtaking the, quality aspects of building and so forth. I see that happening, and so that's why I think it's basically, just creeping through this industry. Leaky Homes was part of it, and then certainly after the Canterbury earthquakes.
From your understanding, is it worse in Tauranga than anywhere else?
I've struck, I guess, the bureaucracy in other local authorities around the country. But most of the time you can resolve it. You can actually, people have different opinions, different ideas or expectations as to how they want things done. And, you can resolve it. You can ring them up, you can talk to them, you can say, well, hey, this is my perspective of what my understanding of what's required and what the expectation is, what's yours, and you can resolve it. And sometimes it's like, it's easy just to say, yeah, okay, if that's the way you want it, because you're the one sitting in the chair today, then yeah, we'll do it your way. But this local authority, no, there wasn't an option. You can't basically even really get to them to talk to them about it. It's this is it and that's it. And there was no if, buts or maybes. There was a change in about 2015 in the building group. And I don't know why that change occurred other than the whole building group and department and that, changed. Personnel changed, people changed. Obviously it expanded quite a bit from what I can understand, and different people came into the organisation who had a different way of doing things, and it certainly, certainly changed the industry quite substantially. And to the point that I think every engineer in town was struggling with those changes and battling with the implementation of those changes and what this new council or people inside of that council expected. And it certainly went through the industry quite substantially. At the time, I made some complaints against certain individuals in a council. Some of it was just like minor stuff, but it got to a point where it was like, no, there's actually some real culture problems with some of the stuff, and they were asking for stuff to be done, which to this day I still go technically is not required or appropriate, but couldn't seem to get anywhere. Tried to address it by taking complaints through the chief executive at the time, and that just went nowhere. It was a waste of time. I guess the response I had to that was, making a complaint to the chief executive at the time. He was quite impotent in terms of being able to resolve any of this. The way it basically was handled is that he just passes it on to the person who you're complaining about. That person looks at it and reports back and says, no, nothing to see here, chief executive, and move on. And then, certainly that's when problems started happening, and I guess in terms of being able to sort of work in this industry, and some of the clients and so forth that I was dealing with were starting to then have problems as well. information that's being provided just not being acceptable, and then having to, even when you present, logical arguments or rational, arguments, or where, this is what the legislation actually requires, if you want something different, then fine, let's agree on where that requirement is actually prescribed in legislation or something like that. So at least then we have an understanding as to, where it's coming from, why you're wanting it, and whether it is actually necessary to provide it as part of the process. And, but, it got to a point there was no point trying to argue or resolve issues through logical reason. It was just, if this is what they want, you just do it.
So, how is your working relationship now?
It was 2015, there was a breakdown in the relationship, no doubt about that. And then things seemed to settle down for quite some time. But then, sort of, what is we now, 18, earlier this year, midway through this year, no, they've certainly, become more hostile towards me. They now ask for peer reviews on anything that I do. They've lodged complaints to my professional body, and that's a long, drawn-out, dragged-out process. But now they've decided, to start implementing sanctions regardless of the process that we're going through already. They've now lodged a prosecution against me in regards to some of the Bella Vista homes, and it was like, really? Okay, but yeah. So they're now, implementing that and dragged me into, I guess, their claim of these, dodgy buildings up there, or the alleged dodgy buildings. But, so yeah, it's pretty hostile at the moment.
What's the overall effect on yourself?
I'm still able to obviously work and work in the industry and work in this area, but they've provided or requiring additional sanctions, peer reviews, other engineers being involved. So less work for me personally, but I guess I just don't have quite so much to do, which is not a bad thing.
Can you see a resolution?
Yeah, I can. We'll go through the motions, we'll go through the due processes. And, I'm quite comfortable and confident that, things will basically be resolved. That's certainly one way of resolving it, but, these things do take time. They do get dragged out. Another way is, I'd like to think that the new chief executive may be willing to actually take a wider view of the issues that have gone on and be interested in why things have happened, and perhaps look at changing the culture of that organisation and maybe revisiting some of the decisions and actions that they've actually, commenced at this point in time. That would be my optimistic view.
Why are you so passionate about this? What drives you?
I don't like seeing injustice, and I'm willing to stand up for people who I feel are being, unjustly treated. Happy with the legislation. If there's a requirement that we have to meet, whether it be, regulatory or, quality issues and so forth, then fine, we'll meet them. It's written in such a way that it actually protects the landowners and the developers and the builders and the industry from arbitrary requirements. It's there to actually protect them. So if a local authority or a building consent authority or somebody has a requirement, and then that's fine if it's prescribed somewhere that they actually have that authority to actually ask for this. Don't have a problem with it. But what I see is that they actually are quite happy just to extend their jurisdiction and ask for whatever they like and however they like, and and twist things to be whatever their preference is. And I just say, well, that's fine, but where in the legislation does it actually require us to actually provide this or do this? And if it's there, and then fine, let's do it. But if it's not, don't ask for it. Don't require it unless there's some reason or some justification or, something, is there a quality issue? Is there something that, I'm an engineer, so I deal with reason and logic and, facts and observation and that. And so come to me with a reasoned argument and I'll go, yeah, that's a good idea. Technically, this makes sense, let's do it. But if it doesn't pass that test, then don't expect me just to impose it or accept it willingly, because it just adds to the compliance costs of buildings. I mean, if you want to know why the cost of building keeps going up, compliance cost. Look at what the cost of compliance of a building is today. You would expect that there would be competent people in-house to be able to deal with that in the first instance. Once it leaves that organisation, MB is the statutory, or have the statutory authority to oversee, regulate, determine, those sort of matters. They're the ones with the statutory role or the fiduciary duty to oversee that, to take appeals to. And I've had determinations which I've lodged through council, to MB. I've actually just currently lodged determinations for those Bella Vista homes, asking MB to answer the question, are they dangerous buildings?
Have you heard a response?
I've had a response last week that to take a determination, you have to be a party to the build, and parties, legally defined in the legislation. And at the moment, we've lodged it on the basis that council is making a claim that Danny Kensian is the licensed building practitioner. Council's made that claim in regards to those buildings, so we've lodged determinations on that basis, and we're yet to actually then reply back to them. MB have come back and asked us to confirm, the status of our being a party to be able to lodge those determinations, along with other information in regards to, how we are party to it to be able to do that. And all I'm asking is that a claim's been made that they're dangerous buildings, and council has taken some action on that claim. And right from day one, I looked at that and I said, really? They're dangerous buildings? Do you think maybe we should just check to see if they are? And when I heard that they had evicted the landowners on the Friday, I think it was Friday lunchtime, I heard that, they had evicted all these owners and fences were going up and so forth. And I went, boy, council can't make this call of their own volition. They must have had some technical advice, and it was talked about, a technical, or say a geotechnical, engineer had written a report and And I went, boy, who's that? I know the geotech engineers that have been involved in the projects, or that project, and there's a number of them, and all of them had basically had determined that it had not met the test for a dangerous building. So I went, who was it? Must be somebody from Christchurch maybe, or somebody out of town, or it could have been one of the local engineers, and and I sort of was speculating. When I found out who wrote those technical reports, I went, I don't know whether that's very safe to use those reports. And there was a public meeting on the Wednesday, and the landowners had asked me to come along, and I was, in terms of helping them with some technical advice and just the project and the status of them and that. And I asked at that public meeting, or suggested that I don't think it's safe to use those technical reports for the actions that they're taking, of defining them as dangerous buildings and then taking the action. And I gave them a couple of reasons why, or one reason why for each of the two technical reports that they used. And I just said, I don't think that it's safe to use those reports, and I think that, they should be tested. Council ignored my request. They asked me to put it in writing to them. I did so. They completely ignored me. I also asked for some additional or other reports that I hadn't actually received. I knew they were available or had been done, but I hadn't actually seen them. And they refused me those reports largely. In fact, I'm still waiting on one of them. It's at the Ombudsman at the moment, to determine whether I am, able to have it. But all I'm asking is, I think that somebody independent needs to test, the claim that they're dangerous buildings. don't take it on face value, which Judge Heath had to as part of his report. He had to, because that was dictated in his terms of reference. He had to take them on face value. And I specifically asked him that question. It was like, oh, it was interesting that he actually had a straightaway answer to me. He knew that I was going to be asking that question. Council knew that I would be. And all I'm saying is somebody needs to look at it. MB are the ones that should be looking at that. They've got a statutory requirement to test these things, take a determination. And I believe that they should be. The implications to the building industry and all the ratepayers in Tauranga is huge. And also, if they are dangerous buildings, if let's say the standard has been met based on the technical reports that have been provided, then the implications to the industry is actually quite huge, because if they are dangerous buildings, then every day of the week there are thousands of dangerous buildings around New Zealand that have yet to be defined. And if that's the standard, fine. Then we need to start, the industry needs to be aware that all these uncompleted buildings around the country that are in various states of completion can meet the standard of a dangerous building. The industry needs to be aware of that, because then we need to be protecting the adjacent landowners. We need to be protecting the industry in terms of coming onto these sites and so forth. Personally, I don't think the standard has been met with those buildings. So therefore all those thousands of other uncompleted buildings around the country aren't. But if it has, then we need to know. So shouldn't somebody be testing this and checking it out? No, don't take my word for it. Get somebody independent who can actually, or people who can actually look at this and say, are these technical reports safe to use? I mean, the complaints against council have been ongoing since about 2015, I think it is, 16. And what I've seen is that when these complaints come up, they're very good at controlling the narrative, is what I would call it. You know, or let's get this person to do this investigation, look, and they've come out with this report and it's really good. You know, everything's kosher, or maybe there might have been some issues, but nothing to see here, move on. But they're the ones that control that narrative, you know. Judge Heath, you know, his hands were tied by saying, you are to take the technical reports on face value. You know, his report came back and said, hey, I think these need to be robustly tested. He did a fantastic job of limiting that, or passing on those limitations that were put upon him. But they control the narrative. So who is how to figure out who would actually undertake that? MB have a role to do it. They have the resources to be able to do it. You know, they've got the same resources as councils do, and it needs to be on a fair, equal playing field of whoever's going to do it. I don't know whether MB themselves should be doing it. They need to engage appropriate technical people, because BCAs, building consent authorities, we know we're very closely with MB in regards to, you know, the industry and all the rest of it. So there's relationships that are there. And if something's going to be critical, then I think it needs to be done. They need to be separated from that for their, you know, their own probity. I think it probably should be more than an individual, because an individual has history, both, you know, in the past in terms of the industry, and also a future in terms of the industry and so forth as well. So I think it really needs to be, you know, potentially a panel or a group of people, you know, not too many, you know, probably 3 people to look at it, ask these questions, get information from all sources, all those voices, because, you know, I'm just one person that's saying, hey, I know the history of what's gone up at the Bella Vista sites, and I think, you know, we need to basically check this stuff out.
Who can initiate that?
MB. Oh, okay. Anyone can in terms of a party to those builds. And that's where we're at with MB in terms of the determinations at the moment. They're coming back and saying to us, or to me, I'm just the agent. Danny asked to take the determinations, and I said, well, okay, I'll be an agent in terms of, you know, putting these through. So we've initiated it, but it has to be accepted by MB, and you've got to pass, you know, the test. Are you a party to it? And some of the builds, I believe that Danny Kensian, being a licensed building practitioner on some of those builds, probably does meet that test. I've made a complaint to MB against the Tauranga City Council, and as part of that complaint, I suggested to MB that they should do a self-initiated determination. So MB can be a party to it and initiate a determination. They came back and said that through the complaint process, Section 200 of the Building Act, I can't request a determination because I'm not a party to it, and they've seemed to be very reluctant to self-initiate it. I hear that as of last week that they're taking some role or review or something like that. It was reported in the media, I believe, over the weekend. I'll be going back to MB and saying, hey, status of my complaint is still sitting there. I hear something's happening. Are you interested in talking to any other parties, or are you just going to be talking to council and what you know? Or are you going to be seeking input from other parties? Because if you are, I'm certainly a party that has a voice and would like something to say, and I think there's probably a few other people that I'm aware of that might be able to, be interested as well. If they don't, then that's a real indictment on, I guess, the structure of the bureaucracy that we live under, if they can't. And that's a real worry. That's scary. If they can't do it appropriately and professionally. I believe that they can. I have confidence in them. I mean, I'm an optimist. I don't think they should be doing it. I believe my understanding with other determinations that I've taken is you take it to MB, MB then appoints appropriate technically qualified people to do the investigation, get all the information, and make recommendations in terms of what the outcome could be. Because the determination process is all about, let's say, a building consent authority and a builder, an owner, somebody else, and council makes a call, and the other party goes, well, I'm not really happy with you just making that call. I think we need to look at it. So you appeal to MB, and MB then makes a legally binding ruling. It's sort of that first of the lower courts. And so normally, you appeal to MB, MB has to appoint the appropriate qualified people to be able to do it. And that's all we're asking them to do. Get the appropriate qualified people to do the investigation and make a call as to, are those buildings dangerous or not? I gave council a couple of weeks to respond to my concern that I don't think that all the technical reports weren't safe to use. Council ignored me, so I then made a complaint to MB. MB have come back and said, well, under Section 200 of the Building Act, your complaint can't require a determination, and I understand that because there's two sides of it. There's a Tauranga City Council, which is a territorial local authority, and there's a BCA, which is the Building Consent Authority. Two separate groups, but they actually sort of, work, or they're the same, one and the same, Tauranga City Council. So they haven't actually accepted my complaint as a path to require a determination. So a couple of weeks ago, we then just lodged applications for determinations, and they've come back and asked for effectively information so that making sure we are a party to it, or we are a party that can actually lodge a determination, and that's where we're at the moment. If it gets accepted, then in theory 60 days, but I've heard of others that drag on a lot longer than that, and I'd be surprised if this one could be done in that 60 days. I mean, it could be, you get the right people, but you've got to find the right people, you've got to engage them, they've got work they're doing, and it'll take time.